Damascus, Syria, June 1999. Every Thursday night, a senior intelligence chief lowers himself into a rooftop jacuzzi 12 floors above the city. Armed guards believe nothing can reach him up there. For 11 months, this routine never changes. The music, the steam, the exact time at 0200 hours. But on one quiet night in late June, a single variable shifts. 340 meters away, inside a concrete water tower marked Site Aleph, a suppressed rifle has been waiting for 11 consecutive nights. Before sunrise, one man will be dead. No alarms will sound, and the shooters will vanish through Damascus's underground. This is Operation Waterline. Hassan Kareem was born in Aleppo in 1951. The year Syria's first military coup set a pattern that would define his career. His father, a mid-level customs official, was executed during the 1963 Ba'athist purge for reasons never officially explained. Kareem was 12. By age 19, he had joined Syria's intelligence apparatus, specifically the Air Force Intelligence Directorate, the most feared branch of a system built on fear. His early aptitude wasn't interrogation or fieldwork. It was pattern recognition, the ability to detect foreign penetration before it metastasized. By the late 1990s, Kareem had become Deputy Director of Counterintelligence Operations. His defining capability was network dismantling. He didn't hunt individual spies. He identified structural vulnerabilities in how foreign services operated inside Syrian territory, then collapsed entire chains of assets simultaneously. Western intelligence assessments from 1997 describe him as operationally conservative, strategically patient, and psychologically resistant to provocation. Associates noted he never raised his voice during interrogations, never deviated from established protocols. This discipline made him exceptionally dangerous. It also made him predictable. Kareem's Damascus penthouse wasn't a luxury. It was psychological warfare. The weekly Thursday gatherings on his rooftop terrace, visible from multiple vantage points across the Mossad district, were designed to project invulnerability. Guards controlled every stairwell. Entry required biometric confirmation and verbal codes that changed daily. The hot tub itself sat behind reinforced glass railings, elevated 3 meters above the main terrace. To outside observers, the message was unmistakable. Syria's intelligence apparatus operated in plain sight because it feared no foreign reach. What Kareem fundamentally miscalculated was doctrine. Israeli intelligence had spent the 1990s refining what internal strategists called the decapitation principle. The logic was straightforward. Remove a critical node, and hostile networks don't just weaken, they freeze while reorganizing. For Mossad's planning division, Kareem represented more than a skilled counterintelligence officer. He was a choke point. 3 specific operations had failed between 1996 and 1998 because Kareem's unit detected advanced preparation. Asset recruitment in Damascus had effectively stopped. Communications intercepts suggested he was coordinating directly with Hezbollah's security directorate, creating a unified counterintelligence front across the Levant. Traditional options failed preliminary evaluation. Vehicle-borne explosives risked civilian casualties and generated unpredictable collateral damage. Close-range infiltration was impossible. Kareem's inner circle consisted of men he'd personally recruited over decades. Diplomatic pressure meant nothing. Syria's regime treated international criticism as validation. The breakthrough came from signals intelligence. In March 1999, communications intercepts revealed Kareem's Thursday routine had become mechanically precise. Arrival time, 01:55 hours. Entry into jacuzzi, 02:04 hours. Duration, 42 to 48 minutes. The variance window was 6 minutes across 17 consecutive observations. An analyst in Tel Aviv noted the statistical improbability. This isn't routine. It's ritual. Mossad's Special Operations Division identified 3 obstacles that defined operational parameters. First, Damascus represented one of the most surveillance-intensive urban environments in the region. Syrian military intelligence maintained overlapping camera networks, informant saturation in residential blocks, and randomized patrol patterns specifically designed to detect static surveillance. Second, any firing position required days of continuous occupation without detection, something conventional infiltration methodology couldn't support. Third, exfiltration from a locked-down capital after a high-profile assassination demanded infrastructure that couldn't be established quickly. The solution required abandoning conventional approach methodology entirely. In April 1999, a shell construction firm called Levant Infrastructure Solutions won a municipal contract for water pressure testing across Damascus's Metzeh district. The company had been registered 8 months earlier through a Cypriot holding structure with opaque ownership. Its contracted scope included structural assessment of 3 aging water towers slated for eventual replacement. One of those towers, officially designated Tower 7 in municipal records, sat 340 meters northwest of Kareem's building. Site surveys began in early May. Syrian authorities conducted standard background checks on the firm's documentation, all of which returned clean because the paperwork was genuine, filed through legitimate channels, supported by actual engineering reports. The operation's first rule: never fake what you can create authentically. Tower 7 became Reservoir 1 in operational communications. The structure itself was unremarkable. A 40-meter reinforced concrete cylinder built in 1978, accessed by external maintenance ladder, topped with a small equipment platform. Internally, it contained 2,000 cubic meters of water and a narrow inspection shaft running floor to ceiling. That shaft would become the hide. Over 3 weeks, a rotating team of 4 operatives posing as structural engineers installed what appeared to be seismic monitoring equipment inside the tower. The actual construction was more specific. A false wall partitioned off 2 square meters of the inspection shaft. Ventilation baffling reduced thermal signature to match ambient concrete temperature. Acoustic dampening prevented sound transmission. A concealed hatch provided entry from the equipment platform above. The rifle arrived in components across 5 separate shipments, disguised as calibration equipment for water testing instruments. The weapon itself was a custom bolt-action platform chambered in 7.62 x 51mm NATO, fitted with a suppressor engineered to reduce muzzle signature below 30 decibels, quieter than conversation at 3 meters. The scope was Israeli manufactured, incorporating laser rangefinding and ballistic computation. Assembled weight, 6.8 kilograms. Zeroing occurred on site using subsonic ammunition and a suppressed barrel calibration procedure that produced no audible report beyond the tower's interior. The exact distance to Kareem's rooftop, measured via laser, 341.2 meters. Wind assessment protocols accounted for Damascus's typical early morning thermal patterns. Humidity calculations factored steam dispersion from the jacuzzi itself. The team structure followed strict compartmentalization. One shooter, selected for documented long-range capability and psychological stability under extended isolation. One observer, responsible for wind reading, steam density assessment, and abort authority. One logistics officer, rotating supplies every 48 hours through the legitimate construction workflow. None knew the operation's broader strategic context. All operated under civilian cover documentation that would survive intensive interrogation. By June 15th, the system was operational. Then came the waiting. During the first night of observation, Kareem hosted 7 guests. They remained on the terrace until 0320 hours. Abort. Night 2. Heavy cloud cover obscured thermal imaging. Abort. Night 3. Kareem entered the jacuzzi, but sat upright, head below the glass railing line. Abort. The rules were absolute. Any deviation from optimal conditions meant stand down. The psychological toll of extended static surveillance is well documented in intelligence literature. Operatives describe time distortion, sensory deprivation effects, and what field manuals call anticipation fatigue. The gradual erosion of reaction speed caused by repeated abort cycles. On night 6, the shooter reported experiencing visual artifacts when staring through the scope. Phantom movements in peripheral vision that disappeared under direct focus. The observer noted this in the operations log, but assessed it within acceptable parameters. The mission continued. On night 9, Syrian military intelligence conducted a random patrol sweep through the Mossad district. 2 officers climbed Tower 7's external ladder to inspect the equipment platform. They spent 4 minutes examining the seismic monitoring devices, radioed confirmation of legitimate contractor presence, and departed. Inside the false wall, 2 meters away, the shooter and observer maintained absolute silence for 17 minutes until patrol communications confirmed area clearance. This moment represents what intelligence psychologists call acute compartmentalization stress. Both operatives understood that discovery meant either immediate execution or diplomatic catastrophe. Neither could abort without compromising the other. The post-operation debrief noted physiological indicators: elevated heart rate, suppressed respiratory function, consistent with life threat response. But training held. The mission continued. Intercepted communications from June 24th reveal Kareem discussing his daughter's upcoming wedding with his wife. Analysts noted nothing operationally relevant in the conversation. He mentioned concerns about guest seating arrangements, his wife's preference for a specific caterer, his own reluctance to deliver a traditional father's speech. The transcript runs 4 pages. When Syrian authorities later notified his family, his daughter was finalizing table assignments. By June 27th, operational fatigue had become critical. The team had occupied Reservoir 1 for 11 consecutive nights. Resupply logistics were straining. The construction contract's timeline meant legitimate work crews would arrive at Tower 7 within 72 hours, making continued covert occupation impossible. That night represented the operation's final window. June 27, 1999, 0130 hours. Damascus settled into its early morning stillness. That brief window between late-night traffic and pre-dawn call to prayer. Inside Reservoir 1, the shooter and observer had been positioned since 0015 hours. 90 minutes of motionless preparation in a space barely large enough for 2 people to sit upright. The temperature inside the concrete shaft held steady at 19 degrees Celsius. External temperature, 24 degrees. The differential prevented thermal bloom that might register on any scanning equipment, though Syrian surveillance relied more on human networks than technical systems. The rifle sat mounted on a custom bipod, barrel aligned through a ventilation slot that appeared identical to the tower's original 1978 construction design. Muzzle position, 3.2 meters back from the opening to prevent visible signature. The suppressor added 18 centimeters to overall length, requiring precise internal positioning to maintain concealment. The observer monitored 3 separate inputs simultaneously. First, a fiber optic surveillance feed showing Kareem's rooftop, installed 2 weeks earlier by a Mossad team posing as telecommunications contractors upgrading cellular infrastructure. Second, a handheld anemometer measuring wind conditions at the tower's position. Third, radio intercept monitoring Syrian military police communications for any indication of heightened alert status. At 0152 hours, vehicle headlights appeared in the fiber optic feed. Kareem's armored Mercedes, license plate Delta 79421, pulled into the building's underground garage. Syrian protection protocols required a 6-minute security sweep before principals entered residential spaces. The timeline was beginning. 0158 hours. The observer whispered wind conditions. 1.1 meters per second, northwest quarter. The shooter made no response. Communication protocols in the final phase were minimal. Acknowledgement created unnecessary noise. The ballistic challenge was specific. At 341 meters, a subsonic 7.62 millimeter round experiences significant drop, approximately 1.8 meters under ideal conditions. But conditions were not ideal. The steam from Kareem's jacuzzi created a thermal column that would deflect trajectory by an estimated 4 to 7 centimeters, depending on density. The glass railing introduced another variable. 9 tempered glass could deflect a subsonic round by up to 12 centimeters if strike angle exceeded 8 degrees from perpendicular. The shooter had calculated these variables across 11 nights of observation. The solution was geometric. Aim point 14 centimeters above and 6 centimeters left of desired impact, accounting for wind drift, steam deflection, and glass refraction as a combined system. The margin for error was 3 centimeters in any direction. 0201 hours. Lights activated on Kareem's terrace. The fiber optic feed showed 4 guards taking standard positions, 2 at the interior stairwell entrance, 2 at opposite corners of the terrace perimeter. None faced outward. Syrian protection doctrine emphasized close-range threats and internal betrayal, not long-distance precision fire. This doctrinal blindness had been identified in Mossad's initial feasibility assessment. 0203 hours. Kareem emerged wearing a white terry cloth robe. The observer noted this detail immediately. White fabric provided optimal contrast for thermal imaging and visual confirmation. Some elements of fortune favor the prepared. Kareem walked directly to the jacuzzi, removed the robe, and lowered himself into the water. The routine was proceeding exactly as observed on 14 previous Thursdays. 0204 hours. Steam began rising from the water surface, creating the thermal column the shooter had been calculating for 11 nights. The observer monitored density through the fiber optic feed's infrared overlay. "Acceptable," he whispered. But Kareem remained submerged to shoulder level, head resting against the jacuzzi's back edge. This position had occurred on 6 previous observations. The kill zone, upper thoracic cavity, was obscured by waterline and steam. The shooter maintained aim point, but did not pressurize trigger finger. Waiting. 0205 hours. Wind shifted. The anemometer registered 1.4 meters per second, now from direct northwest. Abort condition. The ballistic solution was calculated for 1.1 meters per second from northwest quarter. A 30% velocity increase changed deflection mathematics beyond the 3 centimeter margin. The shooter relaxed trigger pressure. The observer noted the wind shift in his mental log, but maintained silence. Abort decisions didn't require verbal confirmation. The shooter's judgment was absolute within defined parameters. 90 seconds passed. Kareem remained motionless, eyes closed, head tilted back. The guards showed no alertness indicators. One was checking his watch. Thursday night duty, 0200 hours. Everyone present had performed this routine dozens of times. Boredom was setting in. 0207 hours. Wind decreased. Anemometer reading 1.2 meters per second, northwest quarter. Within acceptable parameters, but at the upper threshold. The shooter would need to adjust aim point by approximately 2 centimeters left to compensate. The question was whether Kareem would provide the shot before wind conditions shifted again. Then Kareem moved. He leaned forward, reaching for something on the jacuzzi's edge, a glass, previously unnoticed in the steam. The motion brought his upper torso above the waterline, leaning slightly forward, head and shoulders fully exposed. The white steam provided backdrop contrast. The glass railing was directly perpendicular to the shooting position. Every variable aligned simultaneously. The observer said nothing. The shooter saw the same geometry. 0208 hours, 14 seconds. The first pressure came on the trigger, taking up slack in the mechanism without engaging the sear. This was rehearsed muscle memory, performed identically across 11 nights of aborted shots. Second pressure, feeling for the break point, that micromillimeter where mechanical resistance would give way. The crosshairs settled 14 centimeters above Kareem's exposed upper sternum, 6 centimeters left of center mass, accounting for steam deflection, glass refraction, and wind drift as a unified mathematical system. Third pressure, the sear released. The rifle's recoil impulse was negligible. Subsonic ammunition generates minimal blowback, and the suppressor's internal baffling absorbed most mechanical energy. The sound inside Reservoir 1 was comparable to a heavy book closing. Outside, in Damascus's pre-dawn quiet, nothing registered above ambient city noise. Flight time at 341 meters, 0.42 seconds. The round passed through the thermal column, experiencing predicted deflection. It struck the glass railing at 7.3 degrees from perpendicular, within tolerance. The tempered glass fragmented, but did not shatter, creating a 9-centimeter hole with minimal radial cracking. The bullet's trajectory altered by approximately 5 centimeters downward due to glass density, but remained within the calculated margin. Total deflection from aim point to impact, 2.8 centimeters, within the 3-centimeter acceptable error. The round entered Kareem's upper left thoracic cavity 3 centimeters below the clavicle, traveling at 412 meters per second. The subsonic projectile's relatively low velocity meant reduced hydrostatic shock compared to supersonic ammunition, but the wound channel was catastrophic. The bullet transited through the left lung's upper lobe, nicked the aortic arch, and lodged against the 4th thoracic vertebra. Kareem's physical response was immediate, but not dramatic. He jerked backward, mouth opening, right hand moving toward his chest. No scream. The sound of his breath escaping was lost in the jacuzzi's bubbling water. He slumped sideways, upper body sliding below the waterline. 4.3 seconds elapsed before the nearest guard noticed something wrong. The man's attention had been focused on the street below, watching late-night traffic. When he turned back toward the jacuzzi, he saw Kareem's head partially submerged, water around him beginning to darken. The guard shouted. 2 others rushed forward. None looked outward toward the city. None heard any shot. Their training focused on immediate threats, medical emergency, possible cardiac event, potential poisoning. The concept of a precision rifle shot from 341 meters didn't exist in their tactical framework. While 4 guards attempted to pull Kareem from the water, inside Reservoir 1, the breakdown sequence had already begun. 0209 hours. The shooter retracted the rifle from the firing position, disconnected the scope, and began field stripping the weapon into 7 primary components. Each piece fit into a custom foam insert inside what appeared to be a standard surveying equipment case. The suppressor, still warm, was wrapped in thermal insulating fabric to prevent heat signature during movement. The observer collapsed the fiber optic surveillance feed, pulled the cable back through its concealed conduit, and sealed the access point with fast-setting epoxy that would cure to match the concrete's original color within 6 hours. The radio intercept equipment was powered down and packed. Both operatives moved with practiced efficiency. No wasted motion, no verbal communication. 0 to 12 hours. Syrian military police communications lit up on the frequency monitor just before shutdown. Medical emergency, Mossad district, officer down, require ambulance. Address. The operatives were already moving. The observer exited through the upper hatch onto Tower 7's equipment platform, carrying the surveying case and a standard contractor's toolkit. The shooter followed with a second case containing the radio equipment. Both wore civilian contractor clothes, dusty work pants, company logo jackets, hard hats. To any observer, they were technicians finishing a late-night shift. The descent via external ladder took 43 seconds. At ground level, a white van marked with Levant Infrastructure Solutions livery was parked in the designated contractor zone, exactly where it had been parked every night for 11 days. The logistics officer sat in the driver's seat, engine already running, reading a newspaper under the dome light. To passing patrols, nothing appeared unusual. Both operatives loaded equipment into the rear compartment and climbed inside. The van departed at 0 to 15 hours, traveling at legal speed toward the Mossad district's southeastern edge. Damascus's pre-dawn traffic patterns provided natural cover. Commercial vehicles moving between districts weren't unusual. Bakeries, delivery services, and maintenance crews operated on 24-hour schedules. The van's route had been rehearsed 17 times over 3 weeks, always at similar hours, establishing pattern legitimacy with any observing intelligence services. The critical vulnerability was the immediate period following the shot. Syrian security protocols mandated automatic citywide lockdown after any attack on regime officials. Checkpoints would activate within 12 to 18 minutes. The mathematics were unforgiving. The van needed to cover 8.4 kilometers and reach the exfiltration point before closure. 0 to 17 hours. The van turned onto Port Said Street, heading southeast. Syrian police vehicles passed in the opposite direction, sirens active, racing toward Mossad. None stopped the contractor van. 0 to 21 hours. First checkpoint appeared ahead. A temporary roadblock. 3 military vehicles, 8 personnel conducting vehicle searches. This was ahead of predicted timeline. Syrian rapid response capability had been underestimated by 4 minutes. The logistics officer slowed but maintained steady speed, approaching the checkpoint without hesitation. The surveying cases in the rear compartment were designed for this scenario. If opened, they contained actual surveying equipment, theodolites, measuring tools, technical manuals. The rifle components were hidden in a false bottom accessible only by removing the foam insert with specific pressure points. A casual inspection would reveal nothing suspicious. The officer at the checkpoint waved the van to a stop. He circled the vehicle once, noted the company logo, glanced through the windows at 3 tired-looking contractors in work clothes. "Where are you coming from?" "Water pressure testing, Tower 7 in Mossad." The logistics officer replied, handing over documentation. "Municipal contract running late because the equipment needed recalibration." The officer examined the paperwork for 11 seconds, then waved them through. The documentation was perfect because it was authentic. The company was real. The contract was real. The only fiction was the individuals' identities. 02:26 hours. The van cleared the checkpoint and accelerated to normal traffic speed. 5.2 kilometers remaining. Inside Reservoir 1, at this precise moment, Tower 7's interior was empty and sterile. The false wall remained in place, but would survive any casual inspection. The ventilation slot showed no sign of recent use. The fiber optic cable's entry point was sealed. Even forensic examination would require knowing exactly what to look for. 02:31 hours. The van entered Damascus's Old City periphery, where the narrow streets made vehicle checkpoints logistically difficult. Syrian security focused on major arterial routes. Infiltration and exfiltration through the historic district's maze required pedestrian surveillance, which was intensive but not absolute. The van parked in a commercial loading zone behind a wholesale fabric warehouse. All three operatives exited carrying the equipment cases and walked 2 blocks south to a residential building that had been leased 4 months earlier through a Lebanese intermediary. The ground floor unit appeared to be a small import-export office, complete with filing cabinets, business licenses, and a receptionist's desk that was never occupied. The back room contained a false floor. 02:38 hours. The operatives descended into Damascus's Ottoman-era sewage network, a labyrinth of vaulted tunnels built in the 16th century, expanded during the French Mandate period, and largely forgotten in the modern city's infrastructure planning. Syrian intelligence knew the network existed, but considered it too contaminated, too unstable, and too complex for operational use. Mossad had spent 8 months mapping every accessible passage. The route had been rehearsed 6 times during preparation. Distance through the tunnels to the exfiltration point, 2.7 kilometers. Estimated travel time, 43 minutes. The team moved in single file, using infrared headlamps that were invisible to anyone without night vision equipment. The surveying cases had been transferred to waterproof packs. The smell was overwhelming. Decades of sewage, stagnant water, decomposing matter. One operative would later describe it as breathing through liquid rot. At 02:54 hours, they encountered the first obstruction, a partial tunnel collapse that hadn't appeared in the previous reconnaissance. The blockage was navigable, but required climbing over broken masonry while carrying equipment. This added 7 minutes to the timeline. Above ground, Damascus's security apparatus was in full mobilization. Radio intercepts later obtained by Israeli signals intelligence revealed the scope. 216 checkpoints activated, 4,000 personnel deployed, all border crossings to Lebanon closed, airspace restricted. Syrian military intelligence had declared a Level 1 security event, reserved for direct attacks on regime leadership. But the dragnet was designed to catch operatives fleeing the city by conventional routes. The concept of foreign intelligence teams moving through sewage tunnels beneath the old city didn't exist in Syrian threat modeling. 03:27 hours. The team reached the exfiltration point, a maintenance access shaft in the basement of an abandoned textile factory on Damascus's southern edge. The building had been purchased by a shell corporation in 1997, ostensibly for future renovation. The renovation never happened. The building remained vacant, surrounded by similar defunct industrial structures. The operatives emerged into the basement, sealed the tunnel entrance behind them, and moved to a prepared safe room on the second floor. That room contained civilian clothes, identification documents for 3 Lebanese businessmen, a vehicle registered in Beirut, and supplies sufficient for 72 hours. At 03:41 hours, 53 minutes after the shot, all 3 operatives were off Damascus's streets, inside a sterile location with no documentary connection to their operational identities. The van they had abandoned would be discovered at 06:15 hours, Investigation would trace it to Levant Infrastructure Solutions, which would lead to a Cypriot holding company, which would lead to a dissolving chain of shell corporations that terminated in jurisdictional dead ends. The documentation was legally authentic. The companies had been real, the contracts genuine. They simply ceased to exist after June 28, 1999. The shooter, observer, and logistics officer would remain in the safe house for 61 hours before exfiltrating across the Syrian-Lebanese border using a trade convoy route Mossad had cultivated for 18 months. By July 2nd, all three were in Tel Aviv, undergoing standard post-operation medical and psychological assessment. 0640 hours, June 28th. Kareem's body was discovered by the guard rotation arriving for morning shift. The overnight guards had attempted resuscitation for 18 minutes before accepting clinical reality. Syrian protocols required medical examination before moving any body in a security-designated residence. The examining physician initially documented cardiac arrest, a plausible conclusion given Kareem's age and the visible scene. The autopsy, conducted at 0930 hours, corrected that assessment. The entry wound, partially obscured by water immersion and guard-inflicted trauma during resuscitation attempts, was identified as ballistic injury. The recovered projectile, lodged against the vertebrae, was identified as 7.62 Caliber 51 mm NATO standard ammunition. The angle of entry suggested long-distance trajectory. Syrian forensic analysts calculated probable firing position within a 300 to 400 meter radius. Every building, rooftop, and elevated position within that radius was searched over the following 72 hours. Tower 7 received particular attention. Its elevation and line-of-sight geometry made it an obvious candidate. Syrian engineers examined the structure for 3 hours. They found seismic monitoring equipment, legitimate contractor documentation, and no evidence of recent human occupation beyond expected maintenance access. The false wall remained undetected. It would be discovered 16 months later during unrelated renovation work. By then, the concrete had settled, the concealment seams had cured to structural uniformity, and forensic timing was impossible to establish. Syria's public response came at 1400 hours, June 28th. A government spokesman announced that Hassan Kareem had died of natural causes. The statement didn't specify cardiac failure, didn't mention investigation, didn't acknowledge violence. International press coverage was minimal. A mid-level intelligence officer's death in Damascus wasn't headline material. Syria's private response was different. 63 individuals were detained in the first 48 hours. These weren't suspected operatives. They were internal security personnel whose positions had granted them knowledge of Kareem's routines, access to his schedule, or proximity to his residence. Syrian counterintelligence operated on the assumption that foreign services couldn't execute this kind of operation without internal penetration. 17 of those detained were never seen again. Syrian intelligence concluded that foreign infiltration must have occurred at some level, even though no evidence supported this. The paranoia was strategic. It paralyzed internal operations for months, while loyalty was reconstructed through fear. Israel's response was silence. Mossad's doctrine on attribution was absolute. Never confirm, never deny, never explain. No Israeli official made any statement. No intelligence source leaked to press contacts. The operation simply vanished into that gray space where state actions occur without acknowledgement. But silence carries information. Regional intelligence services understood immediately. The precision, the patience, the 11-night surveillance, the impossible exfiltration. These signatures were legible to those trained to read them. Jordan's intelligence directorate sent a classified assessment to Amman, within 72 hours. Probable Israeli action. Strategic objective achieved. Escalation risk moderate. They were correct on all points. The strategic impact was immediate and measurable. Kareem's death created a vacuum in Syria's counterintelligence structure that took 18 months to rebuild. His network mapping, the accumulated knowledge of how foreign services operated in Syrian territory, died with him. Successor officers had files, had documentation, but lacked Kareem's instinctive understanding of Western intelligence methodology. 3 active Mossad networks in Damascus that had been dormant since 1997 resumed limited operations in October 1999. Asset recruitment, previously frozen, cautiously restarted. Communication security, which Kareem had systematically degraded through technical penetration, was re-established. The intelligence gains over the following 2 years were later assessed as equivalent to regaining operational vision after 18 months of effective blindness. But costs accrued on multiple ledgers. Syria hardened protection protocols for all senior intelligence personnel. Rooftop access in residential buildings was systematically restricted. Routine schedules were randomized as policy. The operational environment became significantly more hostile for all foreign intelligence activities, not just Israeli operations. Diplomatically, the killing contributed to deteriorating Israeli-Syrian relations at a moment when back-channel peace negotiations were showing fragile progress. The talks collapsed entirely in March 2000. Multiple factors contributed, but intelligence assessments from both sides cited mutual escalation in shadow operations as undermining trust. Whether Operation Waterline was cause or symptom remains debated. For the 3 operatives, the consequences were documented in classified post-operation assessments. The shooter reported persistent dreams about steam patterns for 7 months. The observer developed acute sensitivity to ambient noise, particularly the sound of running water. The logistics officer showed no psychological indicators beyond expected stress markers. All 3 returned to active duty after standard recovery periods. None were deployed to Syria again. The moral calculus presents no easy resolution. 1. Perspective frames Operation Waterline as precision restraint. A single bullet fired at a confirmed target, with 0 collateral casualties, achieving a strategic objective that conventional military action couldn't accomplish without mass destruction. From this view, Kareem was a legitimate military target actively coordinating operations against Israeli interests, and eliminating him was no different than destroying a command center in conventional warfare. The alternative perspective sees systematic assassination by predictability, a state actor waiting patiently for a human being to establish routine, then weaponizing that routine into a death sentence. From this view, the operation represents the industrialization of targeted killing, where intelligence services reduce human beings to patterns that can be exploited with geometric precision. The fact that it was clean doesn't make it ethical. It makes it calculated. Both perspectives contain truth. Kareem was instrumental in networks that facilitated attacks on Israeli civilians. He was also a father planning his daughter's wedding, a man who apparently found peace in a Thursday night routine that gave structure to a dangerous life. The operation that killed him was both a strategic success and a demonstration that no amount of security can protect against patient observation of human habit. The question Operation Waterline leaves unresolved is this: when intelligence agencies reduce human behavior to mathematical variables, waiting for the moment when routine becomes vulnerability, are they executing military necessity or industrializing murder? The answer reveals less about Mossad's doctrine than about how we define the boundaries between warfare and assassination in an era when precision enables killing without proximity. What's your take? If predictability itself becomes a fatal liability, does that change how you think about routine and security? Drop your perspective in the comments. If this story made you reconsider how pattern and vulnerability intersect in modern intelligence operations, hit that like button and share this with someone who thinks about where tactical precision and ethical boundaries meet.